86%. That was the hotel occupancy rate across Palm Jumeirah's five-star properties in January 2026. 6 weeks later, it had collapsed to 15%. 37,000 flights were cancelled in the first 10 days alone. 226,000 short-term rental bookings vanished from platforms overnight. The Dubai financial market closed for 2 consecutive sessions, the first time in 3 years. When it reopened, the real estate index had shed 21% of its value, erasing every gain made that year in a matter of hours. The region was hemorrhaging $600 million every single day in lost visitor spending. And somewhere beneath it all, beneath the sand and the engineered rock and the dreams poured into the Persian Gulf, the island had been sinking at 5 millimeters per year for over a decade. This is not a story about a conflict. This is a story about what happens when the most audacious city ever built confronts the one thing it was never designed to survive, the moment the world stops believing in it. At 2:47 in the morning, on the 1st of March 2026, a Shahed-type drone broke through the sky above the crescent of Palm Jumeirah. The pool was empty. The sun loungers were stacked. The white hallways of the Fairmont The Palm, hallways that had welcomed heads of state, tech billionaires, and royalty from 6 continents, were silent. Then the entrance burned. The smoke rose above the fronds of the most famous artificial island on Earth. 4 people were critically injured. The fire was extinguished within the hour. But that image, had already travelled to every screen on the planet. And somewhere in the world, tens of millions of people who had dreamed of coming to Dubai quietly closed the browser tab and never opened it again. What does it take to bring down a city built on impossibility? In June 2021, satellite images confirmed what the numbers had been saying for months. Dubai had broken its own tourism record for the 3rd consecutive year. The city welcomed 17.15 million international overnight visitors in 2024. In 2025, that figure climbed again to 19.59 million. Nearly 20 million human beings who had chosen, out of every destination on Earth, to land in a city that had not existed in its current form a single generation earlier. Tourism alone contributed nearly $70 billion to the UAE economy in 2025. That represented 12% of the entire national gross domestic product. The Dubai Department of Economy and Tourism had set its sights on 21.4 million visitors for 2026. The trajectory seemed not just sustainable, but inevitable. To understand how Dubai arrived at that peak, you have to go back to the beginning of the century, to a vision so extreme it could only be expressed in the language of the impossible. In June 2001, construction began on an artificial island shaped like a palm tree, rising from the floor of the Persian Gulf. The project required 94 million cubic meters of sand, dredged from the seafloor and shaped by hand and machine into fronds, a trunk, and a crescent breakwater 11 kilometers long. 1 million tons of blasted rock from the Hajar Mountains were used to anchor the foundation. The island added nearly 250 miles of new beachfront to a city that had previously been landlocked by desert on one side and sea on the other. It was visible from space with the naked eye. It was, by almost any engineering measure, one of the most ambitious construction projects in human history. Nakheel Properties, the state-backed developer behind the project, announced the handover of the first residential units in 2006. By October 2007, 75% of properties had been handed over, with 500 families already living on the fronds. By the end of 2009, 28 hotels had opened along the crescent. The Atlantis, The Palm, launched with a party that reportedly cost $20 million, a single night of celebration designed to announce to the world that a new kind of city had arrived. Mohammed Al-Abar, founder of Emaar Properties and one of the central architects of Dubai's real estate transformation, described the era with a clarity that captured the collective ambition of the moment. "We are not building for today," he said in the mid-2000s. "We are building for a future that people have not yet imagined." Property investors who acted decisively between 2004 and 2008 saw returns in the range of 300 to 600%. Some exceptional cases reached 1,000% over 15 to 18 years. The Palm Jumeirah became not just an address but a signal, a proof of concept that Dubai could manufacture desire from nothing but water, sand, and will. By 2025, the island was home to more than 60,000 residents, 30 hotels, hundreds of restaurants, and some of the most expensive real estate on the planet. Comparable properties on the Palm commanded between 3,600 and 14,000 dirhams per square foot, depending on location and view. The Dubai Financial Market Real Estate Index had risen 38% in 2023, 63% in 2024, and 15% in 2025, peaking at 16,910.3 points in February 2026, the highest level ever recorded. But in 2009, something had appeared in the data that nobody wanted to discuss. NASA's laser altimeter satellites, monitoring the stability of engineered structures across the globe, measured something unexpected beneath the Palm Jumeirah. The island was sinking. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, but measurably, consistently, at a rate of 5 millimeters per year. Studies from the Dubai municipality would later indicate that parts of the island had already subsided by approximately 2.5 centimeters. Nakheel disputed the severity of the findings. Sean Lenihan, head of Nakheel's Environment Department, said flatly that the island was intact and that any subsidence would have produced visible cracking in buildings, leaking pipes, and broken windows. "We have no evidence of that happening, Ham," he said. Engineers pointed to the vibrocompaction process used during construction, a method of vibrating the sand until it consolidates into a harder, more stable state, as proof that the foundation was sound. The Palm stayed above water. The property prices kept rising, the tourists kept coming, and the cracks, for now, remained invisible. There were always things that did not quite fit the brochure. When Nakheel revealed, after the first units were handed over, that it had increased the total number of residential properties on the island from 4,500 to a significantly higher figure, buyers who had paid premium prices expecting generous separation between villas found themselves living, as the New York Times reported in 2009, on top of each other. The increase had been made without public announcement. The developer acknowledged only that costs had been miscalculated. The additional units were needed to raise capital. The space between properties, the privacy, the sense of exclusive distance, these had been quietly compressed. Some residents were furious. Most, watching their property values rise, said nothing. Then there were the water circulation problems. The breakwater that protected the Palm from wave erosion and sand drift had an unintended consequence. It restricted the natural flow of seawater around the fronds. In the channels closest to the trunk, where water moved slowest, residents reported persistent odors. Marine biologists noted that coral reef ecosystems that had existed in the area before construction had been destroyed during the dredging process and had not recovered. The underwater habitat along approximately 30 kilometers of the original Gulf seabed had been permanently altered. Environmental groups raised concerns. Official responses were measured and largely dismissive. Beyond the Palm itself, the broader archipelago of Dubai's artificial island projects told a story of ambition that consistently outran execution. The World Islands, 300 small islands arranged to resemble a map of the world, developed between 2003 and 2008, had been sold as the ultimate luxury destination. By 2010, the contractor responsible for logistics warned that the islands were sinking. By the mid-2010s, only a handful of the 300 islands had seen any development. The vast majority sat empty, windswept, eroding quietly in the Gulf. Palm Jebel Ali, the larger sister project to Palm Jumeirah, had been announced in 2002 and designed to be twice the size of the original Palm. Construction paused in 2008 when the global financial crisis hit Dubai's property market with devastating force. The island lay dormant for more than 15 years. Judith Cartwright, chief executive of Black Coral Consulting, a hotel commercial strategy firm operating across the Gulf, had watched the Dubai hospitality market for over a decade. She understood, perhaps better than most, the fragility built into a system that had been running at full speed for so long. Dubai did a great job positioning itself on a much higher level after COVID, House, she said, in early 2026, describing the recovery from the pandemic years. The lower you go, you attract the wrong type of clientele. So many hotels are in a panic mode. She was speaking specifically about rate discipline during a crisis, but her words, delivered just weeks before the worst crisis the market had ever faced, carried a weight she could not yet know. The geopolitical landscape had been shifting for years. The escalating tensions between the United States, Israel, and Iran had been building through 2023, 2024, and 2025 with increasing intensity. The reimposition of economic sanctions on Iran, the internal upheavals documented as the 2025 to 2026 Iranian protests and massacres, and a sustained US military buildup in the region had created a pressure system that specialists in Gulf security had been warning about in policy papers, conference rooms, and quiet diplomatic channels. Dubai, officially neutral, had built its entire identity on the premise that it existed outside the logic of the conflicts that surrounded it. The city had prospered precisely because it was trusted to remain untouchable, a free port of capital, talent, and ambition, insulated from the volatility of the neighborhood. That insulation had never truly been tested. Until the night of February 28, 2026, it had always held. At 12:53 in the afternoon on February 28, 2026, following coordinated military strikes by the United States and Israel on Iranian infrastructure, the Islamic Republic of Iran launched the opening wave of what would become a sustained multi-day campaign of missile and drone attacks against the United Arab Emirates. The first targets were American military installations. Iran's missiles arced toward Al Dhafra Air Base in Abu Dhabi. UAE air defenses intercepted the majority, but debris fell across a residential area near Zayed International Airport. One Pakistani national was killed by shrapnel. 7 others were injured. Loud explosions shook the Corniche district. Smoke rose above Al Dhafra. Within hours, the campaign had expanded. A fire broke out at the Jebel Ali port, attributed by Dubai authorities to debris from aerial interception of an incoming Iranian attack. The Ruwais industrial complex in Abu Dhabi, home to the country's largest oil refinery, a facility that would otherwise produce 922,000 barrels of oil per day, was struck by a drone. The refinery shut down. At 4:30 in the morning Pacific Standard Time, an Amazon Web Services data center in the UAE was on fire after being struck by falling objects. Power was cut. The ripple effects reached digital infrastructure on 3 continents. Then, in the early hours of the 1st of March, the drone reached Palm Jumeirah, the Fairmont The Palm, a hotel that had hosted dignitaries, celebrities, and the wealthiest tourists on Earth since its opening, had its entrance set alight. 4 people were critically injured. The fire was contained. The guests were evacuated. But within minutes, the footage was on every platform on the planet. Headlines did not say debris from interception. Headlines said, luxury hotel attacked in Dubai. The distinction, factually significant, was emotionally irrelevant. The image was already embedding itself in the global imagination. Mark Lee, general manager of Media One Hotel, described what happened to the market in the hours and days that followed with the kind of precision that comes from watching numbers in real time. The booking environment, he told industry reporters, had become unlike anything he had experienced in his years operating in Dubai. Hotels had been directed by Dubai Tourism not to raise prices for guests extending stays, to hold rates, absorb the shock, and maintain stability. But stability, in those first days, was a word that belonged to a different world. Dubai International Airport temporarily closed. Passengers and staff were directed to bomb shelters as defense systems detected incoming attacks. United Airlines cancelled all flights to Dubai until March 4th. Dozens of other international carriers followed within hours. By March 8th, aviation data firm Cirium had recorded 37,000 flight cancellations touching the Gulf. TUI Group, Europe's largest travel company, suspended all Dubai-inclusive packages. MSC Cruises pulled every vessel from Gulf itineraries within 72 hours. The Dubai financial market closed on March 2nd and 3rd, 2 consecutive sessions, an almost unprecedented event. When trading resumed on March 4th, pent-up selling pressure was immediate. Emaar Properties and Aldar Properties both hit their 5% circuit breakers on the first session. The Dubai Financial Market Real Estate Index, which had stood at 16,910 points in February, fell to 13,353 by March 9th. 21% erased in 11 days. New buyer inquiries dropped approximately 45%. Transaction signings were delayed across the board. In the week of March 2nd to 9th, the Dubai Land Department recorded 3,570 property sales worth 11.93 billion dirhams, a number that would have seemed catastrophic against the backdrop of January's 72.4 billion dirham month, the single highest month in Dubai real estate history. And the missiles kept coming. As of April 1st, 2026, Iran had fired a total of 438 ballistic missiles, 2,012 drones, and 19 cruise missiles at targets across the UAE. More than 90% were intercepted by the country's THAAD and Patriot missile defense systems. But the debris fell. It fell in populated areas. It fell near airports. It fell on Palm Jumeirah. 13 people died. 224 were injured. And for every projectile that was destroyed in the sky above Dubai, thousands of people somewhere in the world made the decision, quietly, irreversibly, not to come. The numbers tell the story in a language that leaves no room for interpretation. Hotel occupancy across Dubai's five-star properties had stood at 86% in January 2026, one of the strongest figures ever recorded for that month. By the final weeks of March, Smith Travel Research confirmed that occupancy had fallen to 21%. At properties along the Palm Jumeirah corridor specifically, the Fairmont, the 5 Palm, the Hilton Palm Jumeirah, the situation was more severe. Mamoon Hamidan, Chief Business Officer at regional online travel agency Wigo, reported occupancy between 15 and 20% across the city's luxury segment. Rack rates, which had been among the highest in the world, were cut by between 20 and 40% at flagship properties. The 5 Palm Jumeirah, which had previously charged above 1,000 dirhams per night, was advertising rooms for 349 dirhams as part of emergency promotional packages. Short-term rental data was equally devastating. AirDNA recorded 226,500 short-term rental booking cancellations across the UAE between February 28th and March 29th, a single month. In that same period, the broader real estate market posted its first significant monthly decline after 4 consecutive years of uninterrupted expansion. Residential sales in March 2026 dropped nearly 20% to $10.1 billion, down from the previous month's figures, according to Ryden, a real estate research and analytics firm. Transaction volumes in the first half of March fell to approximately 6,129 units, down from roughly 8,199 in the preceding 2-week period, a 25% contraction in volume. The restaurant and hospitality sector absorbed losses that bordered on extinction level for individual operators. Tourism-dependent venues reported revenue declines of between 50 and 80%. Some operators described losses exceeding 80%. Faced with empty dining rooms, kitchen staff on unpaid leave, and suppliers demanding payment for goods that could no longer be moved, small and medium hospitality businesses across the Palm and downtown Dubai began closing, some temporarily, some permanently. The Anantara World Islands Dubai Resort, located on the World Islands archipelago, announced its permanent closure on April 10, 2026. The hotel had opened in 2021 and had operated for less than 5 years. The aviation sector provided its own grim arithmetic. More than 30,000 flights to and from the Middle East were cancelled from the outbreak of the conflict through late March. Dubai International Airport, which had processed more than 95 million passengers in 2025, more than any other hub in the world, fell to a fraction of its capacity. Airports that had once handled over 500,000 passengers per day reported terminal buildings that were nearly empty. Airlines facing rising jet fuel prices and reduced capacity were already projecting fare increases that would further suppress demand once services resumed. The broader economic projection was staggering. The World Travel and Tourism Council estimated losses of $600 million per day across the Gulf region. Tourism revenues for Dubai had been projected at $35.6 billion for 2026, representing 11.5% of the Emirates' gross domestic product. That projection was built on a target of 21.4 million international visitors. Research by Tourism Economics, published in the weeks following the outbreak of the conflict, forecast that between 23 million and 38 million fewer people would travel to the Middle East for the entirety of 2026. Nancy Gard McGeehee, Professor of Hospitality and Tourism Management at Virginia Tech, surveying the damage with the precision of someone who had studied tourism crises across decades, described what was happening in terms that cut through the noise. Dubai hotel occupancy has plummeted by 70 to 80%, Samatna, she said. Many hotels are opting to close for renovation to save on employment costs. The psychological shift, she noted, was the variable that no model had adequately priced. Dubai had not merely lost visitors. It had lost the perception of inviolability that had made it a destination in the first place. The human cost lived in the spaces between the statistics. Migrant workers, the people from South Asia, East Africa, and the Philippines who formed the backbone of Dubai's hospitality industry, described a situation that felt, viscerally, like March 2020, the first month of the global pandemic. Housekeepers, kitchen workers, pool attendants, and drivers found themselves on unpaid leave with no clarity on when or whether their jobs would return. Many faced the prospect of forced repatriation, a journey back to countries they had left years earlier to send money home to families who now depended on them completely. Along the fronds of Palm Jumeirah, beach chairs sat in rows that nobody filled. Boutiques carrying Gucci and Chanel pulled their shutters early each evening. The Burj Al Arab, which had announced a full 18-month closure beginning April 2026 for its first-ever comprehensive renovation, fell quiet for the first time in its 25-year history. At the Atlantis The Palm, 8,400 guests had been collectively evacuated from the Atlantis, the Burj Al Arab, and addressed downtown between March 17th and 19th as airlines arranged emergency departures from Abu Dhabi International Airport. The city that had been built on the certainty of tomorrow was confronting for the first time genuine uncertainty about whether tomorrow would look anything like today. While Dubai absorbed the shock, its competitors did not pause to mourn. Abu Dhabi had been quietly building a rival gravity for years, and the conflict accelerated everything. The announcement of a Disney theme park on Yas Island, already in development before the crisis, suddenly carried an entirely different weight. In a region where Dubai had been synonymous with global entertainment, the prospect of the world's most powerful entertainment brand planting its flag 90 kilometers away from a city in crisis was not merely symbolic. It was a direct bid for the tourism demographic that Dubai had spent 2 decades cultivating and was now losing at a rate of $600 million per day. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, the sweeping economic transformation program launched by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, had already committed hundreds of billions of dollars to building a tourism industry from near zero. Neom, the futuristic city under construction in the northwest of the kingdom, remained years from completion, but the investment flows, the global marketing campaigns, and the aggressive pursuit of international events were already redirecting attention. The Saudi tourism sector had grown by 22% between 2023 and 2025. That trajectory did not slow during the conflict. If anything, the instability along the Gulf Coast made the kingdom's Red Sea coastal projects, geographically removed from the theatre of direct conflict, appear comparatively attractive to developers and investors surveying the region. Doha had suffered its own disruption from the conflict, given Qatar's position as a regional aviation hub. But Qatar Airways, operating with a level of state backing that insulated it from the commercial pressures crushing smaller carriers, moved aggressively to capture rerouted transit traffic. Passengers who could no longer connect through Dubai International Airport were redirected through Hamad International Airport, where Qatar had invested billions in expanding capacity. Every rerouted passenger was a direct transfer of long-term brand loyalty and aviation revenue from Dubai to Doha. The concept of the critical threshold, the point below which the recovery of a tourism-dependent economy becomes not merely difficult but mathematically implausible, had arrived in Dubai's ledger. Tourism contributed nearly 12% of the UAE's national gross domestic product in 2025. It sustained approximately 925,000 jobs, the overwhelming majority filled by non-resident workers whose continued presence depended entirely on the commercial viability of the sectors that employed them. The Dubai Department of Economy and Tourism had projected revenues of $35.6 billion for 2026, a figure that assumed the continuation of the record-breaking trajectory established in 2024 and 2025. Between 23 million and 38 million fewer visitors were now expected across the Middle East for the year. The loss was not a temporary dip in a rising curve. It was a structural rupture in the business model of a city that had no alternative economic foundation remotely capable of absorbing the damage at this scale and speed. On April 7, 2026, President Donald Trump announced a 2-week ceasefire with Iran, brokered through negotiations facilitated by Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Global markets responded immediately. The Dubai Financial Market General Index surged 8.5% on April 8th, its largest single-day gain since December 2014. Trading volumes rose 5-fold from the previous session to the highest of the year. Blue-chip property and banking stocks, which had been the worst casualties of the sustained sell-off, led the recovery. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 1/5 of all global oil and liquefied natural gas passes every day, began its cautious reopening. On April 17, 2026, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi declared the strait completely open for all commercial vessels for the duration of the ceasefire. Oil prices fell more than 13%. Tanker traffic began to move again. Property viewing activity in Dubai surged 75% in the days that followed as international investors began positioning for what analysts were already calling a post-conflict recovery cycle. But a ceasefire is not a conclusion. The missiles had landed on Palm Jumeirah. The smoke had risen above the Fairmont. The footage had travelled to every corner of the planet. Hotels that had operated at 86% occupancy in January were offering rooms at 1/3 of their standard rate in March. The Anantara World Islands had permanently closed. The St. Regis Dubai. The Palm had taken its inventory offline. Jumeirah's flagship hotel had shut for 18 months. And the psychological damage, the erosion of the belief that Dubai was immune to the geography it had always transcended, could not be reopened with a diplomatic announcement. Every geopolitical crisis that had ever preceded this one had ended with Dubai recovering. 2008, 2020. The question was not whether the infrastructure could survive. The question was whether the promise could. And the clock for that answer was already running. Here is what the record shows. Between February 28th and April 27th, 2026, the UAE absorbed more than 2,800 projectiles, ballistic missiles, drones, and cruise missiles, launched by Iran in retaliation for US and Israeli strikes. 13 people died. 224 were injured. Hotel occupancy on Palm Jumeirah fell from 86% to 15%. 226,000 short-term rental bookings were cancelled. 37,000 flights were grounded. The Dubai Financial Market Real Estate Index lost 21% of its value. Monthly residential sales declined 20% to $10.1 billion, the sharpest contraction in 4 years of uninterrupted expansion. The Gulf region lost an estimated $600 million per day in visitor spending for weeks. And one of the most photographed structures in the world, a hotel on an artificial island in the shape of a palm tree built from 94 million cubic meters of sand, bore a burn mark at its entrance that no amount of renovation could fully erase from the collective memory. Dubai was built on a proposition that was, at its core, an act of defiance against probability. A city with no navigable river, no arable land, no meaningful rainfall, and no historical precedent for the scale of ambition it was attempting, decided in the span of a single generation to become one of the most visited, most invested, and most recognizable places on Earth. It succeeded by selling something more powerful than luxury. It sold certainty. It sold the idea that human ingenuity, deployed with enough capital and enough will, could permanently override the conditions of its own geography, could build an island in a volatile sea, could construct a skyline in a desert, could manufacture a sanctuary in one of the most geopolitically combustible neighborhoods on the planet. For 2 decades the proposition held, and then in the first hours of March 2026, a drone crossed the sky above the crescent of Palm Jumeirah, and the proposition was tested in a way that no marketing campaign, no architectural record, and no property yield could defend against. What was revealed was not that Dubai had failed. What was revealed was that everything extraordinary is also, by definition, extraordinarily fragile. That the same audacity which makes a city impossible to ignore makes it impossible to insulate. That sand, no matter how precisely compacted, remains sand. That a promise of safety is only as durable as the last moment it was kept. Here is what we want to know from you. if Dubai's greatest asset was always the belief that it existed beyond the reach of the regions surrounding it, and if that belief has now been publicly shattered, even temporarily, what does it take for a city to rebuild, not its buildings, but its identity? Can a destination recover from the image of smoke rising above its most iconic landmark? Or is there a point past which the story a place tells about itself can never be quite the same again? Tell us what you think. The answer matters more than it ever has.